¿Cómo aprendería español si tuviera que aprenderlo de nuevo? Bueno, eso es exactamente lo que vamos a discutir en este video. What's up everyone, my name's Ian, and I'm an American polyglot that's been learning languages for the better part of the past 10 years, and I currently speak 6 languages fluently, and probably a couple more, well, not fluently. And now I make videos on YouTube about, well, learning languages in the hopes that maybe I can inspire some of you guys to learn languages yourself, or to help you on your journey of learning languages that you may already be learning. That being said, today, like I said in the beginning of this video, we are going to talk about how I would learn Spanish if I could start all over again. Spanish is one of the most spoken languages in the world and one of the most popular languages in the world. And so there's tons of reasons why someone might want to learn the Spanish language.
Ningún obstáculo es muy grande.
In fact, Spanish was the first foreign language that I ever learned myself, and it's one of my favorite, most utilized languages to this day. That being said, it wasn't easy, and it came with a lot of challenges, but now I'm here today to share my advice with you so that maybe you can learn Spanish and continue on your Spanish learning journey, well, without making the mistakes that I did. Learn from me and be better for it.
Es muy grande.
So, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so when it comes to learning any language, there's two things that I've found to be true. When you're learning a language, you take 2 steps. The first step involves learning the actual language itself, and that's learning the grammar, the conjugations, the vocabulary, that sort of thing. And then the second step is solidifying that knowledge by using the language in active conversations or writing or you name it, actually using the language. And those are the 2 parts to learning any language. And so, we're going to begin with the first part. When learning Spanish, and in general when learning any language, what I always advocate for is learning the alphabet, especially if that alphabet is different from the language that you speak. And in the case of Spanish, if you're watching this video, I assume you speak English. If you do, then chances are you already know the Spanish alphabet for the most part, because it's very similar to that of English. But there are some differences, and it's important to know those differences so that you can know how words are pronounced just by looking at them. Thankfully, Spanish is a phonetic language, and so this is really easy, and it makes it very easy to know how to pronounce words once you learn the alphabet. Step 2. One of the biggest things I wish I could have done, or I should have done when I first started learning Spanish, is getting accustomed to the sound of the language. Spanish is a very consonant-heavy language, and it's also spoken very fast. And most of you watching this video, well, if you've made it this far, probably already know how difficult it can be to understand Spanish when it's spoken. And for that reason, one of the things that I wish I could do is get accustomed to the language by introducing myself to Spanish media earlier. This means listening to Spanish music, watching Spanish TV shows or movies with English subtitles, and there's a YouTube channel I like called Easy Languages, which has a series called Easy Spanish, which is super useful for getting used to the language and how it sounds. And honestly, this is a great way to gauge how your progress is coming along as well, because songs or movies that at first you would not understand without English subtitles, you slowly start to understand as you progress, and it's kind of like, wow, I didn't understand that last week, but I do now, and it's a great feeling. And it helps you get accustomed to the sound of the language so you can understand it better when it's spoken. Step number 3, this is something that I actually did, and it's what I usually do when I learn languages, so this isn't something I would change, but step 3 is learning basic words and phrases. I always suggest learning basic words and phrases in any language when you're first starting out, because it allows you to get accustomed to how it sounds, get accustomed to how the language looks and feels, and it provides you with a bunch of quick wins. When you're first starting to learn a language, you're excited about it, and to maintain that motivation and to maintain that trajectory, you've got to give yourself a bunch of quick wins. And learning basic words and phrases like hello, how are you, ¿cómo estás, de dónde eres, yo soy de, me llamo, things like that really motivate you because, well, it's a quick and easy win. And that's kind of what you need when you're first starting out, to maintain that motivation and excitement.
Es muy grande.
Step number 4, begin with the present tense. I think when I first started learning Spanish, I tried to bite off more than I could chew by trying to learn everything all at once. And Spanish being my first foreign language, that wasn't really that easy. If I could go back, I would focus on one tense at a time, but in particular, I would start off with the present tense, because there's just so much you can describe and so much you can say just using the present tense that people often overlook it and try to rush to the others. And in the case of Spanish, there's also a little bit of a hack where you can use the present tense of the word to go, which in Spanish is ir, to talk about the future without actually learning the future tense. Just like in English, when we use to go to talk about the future, like I'm going to do this, you can say the same thing in Spanish with ir, just knowing the present tense. Like I'm going to do this would be yo voy a hacerlo, or I'm going to eat it, yo voy a comerlo. And all of these things are, well, talking about the future, but using the present tense conjugation. Now, for step number 5, I would start incorporating a little bit of vocabulary at this point. If you've reached this point, you should be learning some vocabulary because that's going to be, well, the next step forward. I would start with the 1,000 most common Spanish nouns and words to know. And a lot of people will define the most common Spanish words and nouns differently, but just a simple Google search will yield tons of pages that'll provide you with this very subjective list. I would suggest using Spanish Dictionary. It's actually a website on the internet, and it has breakdowns of conjugations, meanings, and how to use various words and phrases, verbs in the Spanish language. It's completely free. It's super useful. Not sponsored. It literally actually is helpful. And by learning at least 2 or 3 of the most common Spanish nouns and words every single day will not just keep you motivated, but will actually help you build your vocabulary base as you continue to learn. I say this is step number 5, but this should begin early and continue, well, forever. And it's something that I still try to do today. And when it comes to how you should learn these words, a lot of people find flashcards help them. Me personally, I find that using them in conversation helps, and I will share some free resources for finding practice partners to converse with later on in this video, so just stay tuned for that. All right, so now we're at step number 6. It feels like just a minute ago, probably was literally just a minute ago, but I said focus on the present tense and don't go jumping to the rest. But once you've gotten past the present tense, you pretty much should go jumping to the rest. That'll get you accustomed to how it is that tenses are used in Spanish, and then they're somewhat similar in the other tenses. If I could go back in time, I would personally begin with the past tense, where you will be confronted with the difference between preterite and imperfect. These are 2 different ways to express the past tense in Spanish, but they're very distinct from one another. And there's plenty of resources online that'll teach you the difference between these 2 tenses, but focus on the past tense and learn the difference between imperfect and preterite, and that'll be very key and very important. Then you can start to learn the future tense. Personally, if I could, I would learn the past first, get the hard out of the way, and then focus on the future, because the future tense is a lot more simple. And once you've done the past, the present, and the future, you can start to focus on the conditional and the perfect tenses, and, well, all the other tenses that exist in Spanish. But the one thing you should stay away from is the subjunctive tense. The subjunctive tense in Spanish is a very difficult concept to grasp for most language learners, even those that speak English. Because, well, in English, the subjunctive tense doesn't really exist anymore. Well, it does, but not a lot of people know how to use it or when it's even used. So that brings us to step number 7. Let's assume you take my advice literally and you're like, okay, I'm gonna learn all these tenses, but I'm not gonna learn the subjunctive like you said. Great, well now you should learn the if clauses, which will introduce you to the subjunctive. If clauses are actually something that exists in English, but it allows you to learn how the subjunctive is used in some cases. Because many of the if clauses, which is basically how the word if is used in Spanish, mandate the use of the subjunctive. For example, if I had known it, I wouldn't have done it. Si lo hubiera sabido, no lo habría hecho. That's an example of an if clause, and it forces the use of the subjunctive. And this way you can begin to use the subjunctive without just rolling in it and getting absolutely mentally destroyed. Step number 8. Now that you're getting comfortable with the idea of what the subjunctive is and you know how to use it here and there, such as in the if clauses, you should start actually tackling the subjunctive head on. This is something I actually did. I saved it for last, and I'm actually kind of glad I did, because everything else serves as a foundation for understanding the subjunctive. When tackling the subjunctive, I would start with the mandatory subjunctive triggers. There are certain words and phrases that require that you use the subjunctive with them, and then the conditional subjunctive cases, so to say, which use the subjunctive in certain conditions. And as you get into this process, you'll start to understand the general logic behind the subjunctive case, but if you don't get it completely, don't worry. A lot of Spanish learners don't completely understand how to use it, no matter how long they've been speaking Spanish. I've been speaking Spanish for many years, and I still get myself confused. And number 9, this is the last step in the learning the language part of this video that I mentioned at the very beginning. The last thing that I would suggest that you do, and something that I wish I had done, is learn the reflexive and how it's used. In a nutshell, the reflexive in Spanish, it's a life hack that allows you to circumvent the use of the passive voice in a much easier way. For example, when we use the passive voice in English, as in, this painting is made by an Italian painter, you can say the same thing using the passive voice in Spanish. Esta pintura es hecha por un pintor italiano. But you can also say, esta pintura se hace por un pintor italiano. And this utilizes the reflexive without using the passive voice. And you can just about use the reflexive to replace any situation where you would use the passive voice, and it makes it so much easier. Now, I'm not going to break down what the reflexive is, but now that you know that this life hack exists, I hope you take advantage of it. So now brings us to the last part number 2, arguably in my opinion, one of the most important parts of learning a language, and that is converse and immerse. You spent all this time learning the language, the grammar, all that stuff, and that's great. You can read a menu in Spanish, but you're never actually going to be a Spanish speaker until you speak it. If you haven't already, start listening to Spanish music, start watching Spanish TV shows and movies, watch them with subtitles at first, start removing them as time goes on. Same goes for Spanish music, and start talking to people. If you live in or near a Spanish-speaking country, this might be very easy. If you don't, then what I suggest is getting Discord. On Discord, there's various Spanish language learning servers, which are completely free to join, where native Spanish speakers and native English speakers can congregate, speak to each other, and help each other learn each other's language. And I'm actually a part of a lot of these servers where I go to practice my Spanish from time to time when I can't be bothered to go out on the street and meet someone who speaks Spanish, or be on vacation in Spain or Mexico. And if you're interested in learning more about these Discord Spanish learning servers, let me know down in the comments below and I'll share the ones that I use the most. And finally, one last word of advice before I shut up and you don't have to hear me yap anymore, is that don't worry about the mistakes. I think one of the things that got me down the most and made me struggle learning Spanish the most when I did it was being afraid of making mistakes. I was so afraid of getting my ego hurt and feeling like I'm not progressing when someone shuts me down that I just didn't even bother to try using new words and phrases that I wasn't comfortable using. I stuck to what I knew, and that ultimately hindered my learning process. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Make your mistakes if you need to. Chances are they'll still understand you, and if anything, they'll correct you and you'll be better for it. All right, it's time for me to end the video here. I've been yapping long enough. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you, and I'm hoping that you got something out of this video. You don't have to take everything I mentioned in this video as literal advice. Feel free to pick and choose and take what it is that you felt was the most useful for you. Personally, these are the steps that I wish I had taken in the order I wish I had taken them when I first began learning Spanish. But that's just me. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was useful for some of you, and if it was, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That helps me out, and it really just shows the YouTube algorithm that you love me, and so then the algorithm will love me back. And that being said, if you're interested in more content like this, then please let me know. I hope you check out the other videos on my channel, which will help you get more familiar with the other languages I speak and how it is that I learned them. And with that, thank you guys for watching, and well, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.